Give me a second here. Anyway, as you can probably tell from what's in front of me, we are having and observing the Lord's Supper today. But before we do, we're continuing our sermon series on the book of Genesis. And the section that we're in has been focused on Jacob. And we've seen his name transition to Israel. So I'm going to be bouncing back and forth probably still throughout. But hopefully I'm going to start using Israel a lot more than Jacob. But we've been focused on his family because they're the ones that God has ordained to build the foundation of the nation that was promised to Abraham, the nation of Israel. And it's why his name is pretty important there. But the story of the family's history, as we've seen over the last, several weeks, maybe a couple of months, the story of this family's history has been like this crazy roller coaster, right? Just lots of ups and downs, lots of things going on. It's not like just God said, okay, we're going to make this nation, and then boom, it's there, and no trouble, just, everything just went smooth and all that throughout the whole thing. There's been lots and lots of ups and downs, but the point we're at right now is most of the attention has been focused on Israel's first favorite son. He had a second favorite son, but the first favorite son is Joseph. And so a lot of the attention now is focused on him. And he's the same guy, and many of you have not been going through this with us. Many of you have heard of Joseph and the Technicolor coat. This is not really directly from the scriptures. It doesn't say Technicolor, but anyway, it's sort of the identifier. And so he's had some notoriety because of that play that came out and everything. But it is based on his life. I haven't seen it, so I can't tell you if I recommend it or not, but maybe one of you can chime in later, not now, but later on that. But after many ups and downs, Joseph has now, at the point we're at, he's ascended to become the number 2 leader in Egypt, just behind Pharaoh. Pharaoh, of course, is the top dog, and now Joseph is in second in command. Egypt at the time, as far as we know, was the largest country, largest nation, and so it's a very powerful position that he has. So with the help of God, this young man has done really well because he's been through an awful lot, and if you, again, been following along with the story, you certainly know all that. Now, where he's at in his position, his main responsibility under Pharaoh is the careful distribution of the grain that they had collected during the time of feast, the time of lots of plenty happening, but now they're in a time of famine. And so his job, and again, he got right in the middle of it. God brought him right in that and so forth. But his job is to be the one who distributes it very carefully, because they got to make sure they don't run out. They're got 7 years is what he saw in his vision of famine, and they're only about year 2. So he's got to take good care of that and make sure that it's going to last the whole time. Now, of course, the famine was not just in Egypt. We know for sure that it was at least in Canaan, which was not that far away. But they in Canaan were also having a time of famine, and they weren't so prepared, let's just say. And so that's where Joseph's family lived. And by his family, I'm talking about his dad, Israel, who I just talked about, but his brothers had families themselves, so they're growing quite a bit. But his brothers were, of course, the ones that had sold him into slavery 20 years ago, that made him end up, or helped him end up in Egypt for this whole situation. So that kind of brings you up to where we are. Okay, so last week we saw where the dad Israel heard that there was grain available in Egypt, and so he said, why are you guys just sitting here looking at each other? You may remember that. He said, you need to get up and go on down to Egypt and get some of that grain that hopefully they will make available to us. Now, little did they know when they went down there that their brother Joseph was the one that was in charge. They didn't know that he was the guy that they would have to deal with in this situation. But when they met Joseph, they didn't recognize him, but he recognized them. And so that's where now we've kind of in this back and forth situation that has been taking place. And this encounter, the beginning of this encounter is what we spend our time on last week. And if you recall, Joseph's a very godly man. In fact, he's the first real godly person that we encounter in Scripture, which is kind of crazy because we've certainly talked about a lot. But Abraham had his problems. Isaac certainly had his. Jacob, all of them. But Joseph, very godly man. And but he treated him the way God would treat him. In other words, he didn't treat him the way the world would treat them. If you'd have been in the world, if he'd have been a worldly man, what he would have done is he'd have seen his brothers who had done this to him, even though he had ascended up. It'd been very tempting for him to say, revenge, prison, forever, lock them away, don't treat them well. I mean, all of that would be sort of what you would expect. But no, he looked, and I call this godly authority. As a godly man, the authority that he had, and by that I mean he balanced grace and justice. So in justice, it's very important. In other words, he didn't enact justice by just like I said, locking them up in prison. Although he did lock them up for a short period of time. At the same time, he didn't just say, "Oh, I forgive you for everything you've done, and let's just let bygones be bygones, and let's just move on." He didn't do that either. What he did was he put them to a test. And I spent a lot of time talking about this last week, how important it was for this testing to take place, because these were the people that were going to form the nation, God's nation, the nation of Israel. And so it was important for them to be godly, right? Well, they weren't very godly. What we saw 20 years ago, very selfishly, they hated their brothers, doing all that kind of stuff. So that's the last time he had seen them. And so now he's at a place where he's going to test them, to put them in situations where God could, if he hadn't already changed them, that now would be changing them, or at least revealing the change in them from their evil, selfish ways. Listen, God uses all means, not only for them, but to us, to test us, to help us to see how he's changing us, just like he used Joseph to change them, or to put them in these situations. In other words, we have to realize that when we become saved, we're very selfish people, right? That's all we've known, how to protect ourselves. Now we're moving from self-centeredness to God-centeredness, and there's all kinds of things that God does to us, but he tests us in that. And so I got a little biblical truth, I guess, or godly truth that I want to show you. God tests us not for him to see where we are. In other words, he's not testing you to say, well, let's see if you pass this test. He knows you. He knows you a lot better than you know you. And he knows what exactly you're going to do. But what he does is he tests us so that we can see how holy or unholy we are. And he wants us to be able to see that. In other words, you can say all day long that you trust God, or that you're this and blah, blah, blah. But until you get to a point where you have to trust God, you don't really know. I mean, I appreciate it, and I know there's a lot of sincerity when you say, I trust God, I love God. But until you get to a place where he can test you, and always remember, his ways are not our ways, right? So we sometimes are lulled into thinking, because our world is so powerful in our thinking that something's godly. But God is chipping away at us to help us to understand that it's not, God's ways are not our ways. And so this is a big part of what he does, is he puts us through tests. And so this idea of what he's doing, or what this model of what he's doing with Joseph, is good for us. So like I said, last week we saw that they had confessed their sin of the way that they had treated Joseph in the past. And that was a huge step in how God changes us and changes them. He opens our eyes to see sin that we didn't see before. He gives us a different perspective on the way that we see things. And when we do, as he's been working in us, he begins to change us. not that we beat ourselves up over not doing it, but that our spirit grieves with his spirit over the things that we're still ungodly, the things that are unholy in us. And so as we grieve over those things, what happens oftentimes is we come out with confession. And that's what they did. Last week we talked about that, the confession they had. But it's out of that confession, out of true confession, where God often changes us. Now, all of this sets us up for what's about to happen. And so let's go ahead and jump into chapter 44. So if you have a Bible or the church notes, go ahead and turn there. We're going to start in verse 1, right at the very beginning. I am going to skip over quite a few verses. I'm going to do that for the sake of time, but certainly you can go back. But I'm definitely pulling in the things that I think really illustrate or bring out what I believe God has put on my heart as important for us to take. So here we are, chapter 44, verse 1. Now Joseph gave these instructions to the steward of his house. Fill the men's sacks. Now, the men being his brothers, right? They've come. They're going back. There's been a lot that's happened. You have to go back and fill in the blanks there. But he's saying, fill the men's sacks with as much food as they can carry, and put in each man's silver in his sack. Now, he did this before, where he's like, they paid him, but he's like basically giving it back to them. They're his brothers. Now, he doesn't know that he's their brother, but he's just being generous, okay? Then he said, put my cup, the silver one, in the youngest one's sack. So as morning dawned, the men were sent on their way with their donkeys. Now, I think it's hard for us to imagine clearly the emotional state of the brothers at this time, because they're clueless about Joseph and everything, and the back and forth travel that they've been going through, of course, facing famine, dealing with paranoid father that was back home. And if you remember, he didn't want the younger son to go because he's already lost Joseph, but he's sending them. Anyway, there's just like this whole roller coaster of emotions that they've been on. But always remember that God was shaping them, again, like I said earlier, and equipping them to be the new nation that he's building. And so he's using all of this to do that. Now, we have an advantage, right? Where we sit today, we look back on this as history, but they were living it. So it's important for you to try to project yourself a little bit if you were in their shoes and seeing these things happen before your eyes. So here they are probably feeling pretty good, right? They'd come back. Now he's filled up their sacks and they're returning home. But Joseph was not done with them. I mean, their brother Simeon, who had been left, was going to go back. So they're like, well, things are going great. But Joseph wasn't done, right? That's what that little line in there about him putting the silver cup in the younger one's bag. It was planted for what's about to happen. Verse 4. They had not gone far from the city when Joseph said, go after those men at once, and when you catch up with them, say to them, why have you repaid good with evil? Isn't this the cup my master drinks from and also uses for divination? This is a wicked thing that you have done. So, again, this is what I'm talking about. Their emotional state's going crazy. Again, it's been 20 years since we heard anything about Jacob and his other 11 sons and all this. And so here we are now, and sent his. Now, an interesting side note word used one of these days throughout Scripture, but it is for the Mehiram or the magician. They would often profess it. They were looking to. Now, practice likely that Joseph conviction beliefs or whatever leader stealing they wanted to worship a pagan look up, but he was just trying at this point of being they had been from your master's house. Have it. One of us did it. So he said they were so calm of them would become such a checkered past and stuff, but that's really lowered at this and return open is and then going on, right? They felt pretty until they get to the one the opportunity to get rid of the favorite. Well, Benjamin's opportunity came They were talking about killing him and gave it to him. I mean, so all of Benjamin's the him. But this time their responses had when they heard about Joseph. So all these just interesting. God had begun try their willingness to stand. We'll come up with a by him and apply. Uncovered who was found up will be again. He's sort of continuing to has become the spoke with the to the Messiah now. And so he speaks, emperor, whatever they can, and let them go, servant, my Lord. But let us don't bother. As my Lord, and I shortened this down as very long, amazing speech, which is what he did before, sacrifice himself. Sure, his brother didn't do it. Joseph was used just for sin, never, if this for sin never changed, it doesn't, the outward behavior. And that also is let them run rampant doing once. And it's things that we to have become, remember, the substance blank, my brother, chapter 4. Everyone leave my presence. I am just at his stuff anymore. So he gets his teach for good. He says, listen, he's still for you the breakthrough. He wasn't angry, he was together. I think it's such a famous to Abraham, Eve, and God takes us of we must at times come so a shadow of the coming of Jesus, who were types of Christness to be a part of. Jesus did not, I'm sure, use of Jesus and put faith in Jesus is all. That's what so remember, is far coming into the center